Yo, what is up, doggies? It's your boy Beanie Kowloon, and I'm back for part 2 of the Psychedelic Iceberg. Before we dive into the wild and wacky world of psychedelics, I do want to disclose to you dogs that there are some serious risks to these substances. I do not recommend anyone tries any of these substances that I talk about this video, and if you're underage, I actually recommend that you stay away from all these substances. And I already know if you're a younger viewer who wants to try psychedelics and you hear me say this, you're just gonna think, fuck that, I'll do what I want, it's not gonna end up hurting me. Or at least that's what I thought when I was younger, and I ended up getting really into psychedelics when I was 17, and honestly, I kind of regret it. I don't really regret it because, I live life with no regrets. I'm kind of just a boss like that, but I certainly would not advise that anyone else try psychedelics at a younger age. I understand there's a lot of benefits from psychedelics and a lot that you can learn from it, but the way I see it is there's a lot to figure out in the normal world first, just who you want to be as a person, find some skills you're good at, figure out stuff that makes you happy. Once you figure out, how to just enjoy life normally, then I'd say it's a good time to hop into these spiritual trippy worlds and figure that shit out. Because honestly, in my experience, if you're using these psychedelics to try to figure out who you are as a person or what you want to be, there's going to be a lot more questions than answers. But yeah, that's my tangent on why you guys should really wait on trying these substances. They're always going to be here, you're in no rush, and it's really just best to take these things when you're at a good place in your life. Alright, but with all that out of the way, let's dive into the second layer of the psychedelic iceberg. Alright, but before we break down this iceberg, I'd like to say that we're going over the second layer in this video. I went over the first layer in my previous video. Please go check that out if you haven't already. And if you don't know what an iceberg video is, I'm not going to explain this shit to you because, what are you, fucking stupid or something? Is this your first day on YouTube? Alright, that might have been a little aggressive. I'm sorry, guys. I'm really going through a lot right now, and I don't have time to explain how fucking iceberg videos work. You know what? Just you know how it works. Let's just jump into this shit. Transpersonal psychology. In psychology, there's a lot of different theories on what kind of psychology works the best for people, as no one really knows the correct answers to life, and transpersonal psychology looks a lot more into the spiritual aspects of psychology. Transpersonal psychology is described as something that focuses on the mind-body connection, blending traditional concepts like behaviorism and humanism with philosophy, mindfulness, and mysticism. Transpersonal psychology focuses on 3 big fundamental concepts, and that is connection to a larger sense of existence, recognition of what's sacred, and a drive to find a greater sense of being. Now, there's obviously a lot more to this concept of psychology, and it's a lot more that I don't really know, nor do I really want to look into. But if you are curious about this, go see a therapist, dog. I don't know. Sandoz. This is an international pharmaceutical company that manufactures over 1,000 chemicals, and the reason we see it on this list is it was under this company that Albert Hofmann and other researchers discovered LSD. They were actually trying to make a drug that constricts blood vessels, and they accidentally made a drug that makes you trip sack. There's a lot more to this story, but I'm going to be talking about this more in depth later in this iceberg. Psychedelic tolerance. Psychedelic tolerance can be a real bitch when you're going through your honeymoon phase of psychs and you just want to trip sack all day, every day. The tolerance is truly no joke. In my experience, it's best to wait at least 2 weeks before you trip again. Obviously it also depends on how much you took and what you're planning on taking this next time. There's also whole ass tolerance calculators where you can type in what substance you took, how much you took the first time, and it'll tell you how much you should take or how long you should wait to get the desired effects that you want. But yeah, in my opinion, it's really not healthy to be taking more to try to fight against the tolerance or just to be taking it every other week. If you abuse psychedelics, they're going to lose its magic just like any other drug, and on top of that, when you abuse psychedelics, in my experience, the trips start becoming a lot more darker and, just not as good. It really became something that I would just escape to at a point, and, I didn't really even care if it was good or bad. I just enjoyed hiding out in the 4th dimension, and, that shit, it's not good for you. That's crazy, man. Have you ever tried DMT? This is obviously a reference to the one and the only Joe Rogan. Basically, Joe Rogan will bring up DMT in basically every single podcast, and it basically became an internet meme how often he would ask his guest about DMT.
Jack Stanhope, when the first time he and I did DMT, I was worried I lost him.
64-story thing in front of me, and there's these human catacombs, and people are shitting into these tubes, and they go down through the water, and there's pipes everywhere with human shit, and then there's electricity pumping through everything, and everyone's got a TV or a PlayStation running, and we're all just juiced into this machine. And
Kanye?
Yeah.
Well, he's talking about a lot of crazy shit. He actually talked about DMT in one of his recent songs.
Really? You think he did that before?
I think he did.
This is the story of DMT, or dimethyltryptamine, a simple compound found throughout nature which has profound effects on human consciousness.
But honestly, the amount Joe Rogan talks about DMT isn't really out of the norm compared to anyone else who smoked DMT. Anyone who's smoked DMT and broken through understands the struggle of trying not to bring up DMT at every possible moment, because like, it almost relates back to everything, but every time you bring it up to people that don't know what DMT is or aren't really into psychedelics, you just look like a big tweak. Like, I can't even begin to tell you guys how many people I've scared off by going on crazy tangents about how I met God and how we're all actually God and how that we're living in a simulation. It's just some wild and wacky shit, and it's hard not to talk about it, so I understand where Mr. Joe Rogan is coming from. Now, I know Joe Rogan gets a lot of hate on the internet nowadays, but regardless of your opinions on this man, it really can't be slept on the amount Joe Rogan spread the word of psychedelics, and especially DMT. Like, the average civilian and maybe people who might have tripped a little bit of sack before the Joe Rogan experience honestly probably would not even know what DMT is. Just the amount Joe Rogan talks about DMT and the amount of influence and listeners he has, he's probably done more work spreading the word of DMT than just about anybody else. I mean, I can say from personal experience, he was definitely the first that told me about the drug DMT, and I mean, whether that's a good or a bad thing, I don't know, but regardless, I pulled up a picture of Joe Rogan when I first smoked this shit, so I don't know. Salvia extraction. This is referring to the process of extracting the salvia plant into a much more potent psychedelic drug, and for obvious reasons, I'm not going to talk about how to actually extract this because, you know, I don't think I should just be teaching y'all how to make drugs, but I will quickly go over the effects that salvia has on its users, and I think after you hear it, you're probably not going to be too interested in trying salvia anytime soon. When salvia is smoked at high doses, it's known to be one of the most potent psychedelics known to man. The effects of salvia tend to be a lot more wild, wacky, and just straight up ridiculous than other psychedelics that you might associate with it, like DMT or psilocybin, which is kind of hard to believe because DMT is just straight wild and wackiness. But through my research and the stories I've heard about this substance, it would seem that salvia, when it makes you trip sack in these wild and wacky ways, it never really leaves you with like a message that makes any sense, unlike psilocybin and DMT, which, while it might feel completely strange and alien, a lot of the times you will come out of it with like a deeper message about yourself or the universe, and I mean, it still might not make any sense, and it might be even more confusing, but at least it feels like it's trying to tell you something. Another really big difference between salvia and your classic psychedelics is salvia tends to just be a lot more scary. A lot of people who've tried it say they get a feeling that just something's off or something's not right, like they feel like they're out of place. And a lot of people say that they feel like they're going to be trapped in this terrifying dimension, and just most of the effects do not sound very pleasant. The best way I can really describe the effects of salvia is just showing you guys some user reports I found of people discussing this substance.
And then I remember, like, the most easy to remember part was slapping and slamming, and I remember it coming in all directions, and it was like I was unfolding in all these different directions, but I didn't identify as unfolding. It was just an experience, and I was just going with it. Like, I didn't know what folding was. I didn't know I was human. And then I saw myself unraveling against the wall that had like this window on it, and the sunlight was coming in, and I was just unraveling really rapidly against this wall, and it was like slam, slam, slam. It was like metal on metal contact over and over again, extremely disorienting and unpleasant. And when I finally unraveled, I was this yellow mat on the wall, and it had what looked like a like this weird bug head coming out the front of it. You know, it looked like a slug head, and it was very flattened, and it had like, you know, the two eyes poking out of the sides. But it was all made of matte material. I was a mat, and I was stuck against this wall, and my whole body encompassed what this mat was, even though it was against the corner and curving and everything. I was the mat, like, and I remember feeling like deep down, like, this is wrong. Like, I'm not supposed to be aware if I'm an inanimate object. Like, even though I forgot everything, I just felt like the experience I was having wasn't right, and I didn't understand it.
A really big rip, and that's when like reality was like really like they're just tearing apart, kind of like a zipper. I've had a zipper effect. I know people have talked about. So it was like that, but they were singing like, oh, you're trapped here forever, you fucked up really bad, there's no going back, you know? And it was like a toy factory, so I was being like moved through like a factory full of Lego people. So the toy people were like basically taking me apart, folding me into a box, and then unfolding me. It was like really like vivid, just being slammed into the ground and torn apart and put back together kind of thing.
So yeah, 99% of Salvia trip reports just sound absolutely terrifying and gives little to no value in a learning or growing experience. And while most people have very negative experiences with this drug and have absolutely no intention on ever taking it again, there is the odd trip report where someone talks about how Salvia gave them a very powerful learning, growing experience. So like, I don't want to completely just shit on the drug, but I will say for the most part, Salvia does not seem like a drug that most people should try. I mean, if you really want to trip, there's a lot better psychedelics that aren't going to just be completely terrifying and nonsensical. Acid test. If you've watched any psych substance, you ought to know about this one.
If you plan on consuming a substance like LSD, you must be prepared to test it by using the ingest reagent.
You must test your LSD. There is a myriad of other substances going around masquerading.
What you need is a reagent test. More specifically, what you're going to need are both the Ehrlich and the Marquise reagent.
And well, if you don't watch psych substance and you don't know about testing your acid, you should get hit because it's actually very important. Because many dangerous research chemicals are often sold as acid. Most common of these is N-bomb, which provides very similar experiences to LSD, but the main biggest difference is N-bomb you can die from. And on top of that, N-bomb and other research chemicals just feel a lot less pure than real LSD. Like, I've taken N-bomb a couple times and it really just does feel a lot less healthy for you. Like, your fingers and shit will like go numb, you'll be really gassy, and just the whole time you'll just kind of have a feeling of uneasiness, or at least I did. And another big reason that these chemicals can be dangerous is they're known as research chemicals, which means that they're very new chemical compounds and they just haven't really been researched like LSD, so we really don't know any of the lasting effects of any of these research chemicals. And on top of that, there's a whole bunch of research chemicals that you could possibly get instead of acid. And you know, it's usually not a good thing to not even know what chemicals you're taking. So to avoid all this, you can get a simple little LSD test and you can figure it out very easily. DMN. DMN is a psychology term and it stands for default mode network. This is basically describing what the brain does when it's in like default mode, you know, when you're not really doing any particular task and you're just sitting there daydreaming, self-reflecting, or just when you're letting your brain wander. While we can monitor DMN with like MRI scans and science shit like that, no one knows exactly what the purpose of DMN is for us as humans. Many theorize that DMN is very closely connected with our consciousness and our ego, as when you're not really doing any task in particular, that is when you're most conscious of yourself, of who you really are. And through science and research, people have figured out that psychedelics actually separate you from your default mode network and it changes how your brain works. And you know, that's why many people say that psychedelics will separate you from your consciousness and your ego. And while us as humans need our consciousness and ego to, you know, like survive and just do everything that we do, it is sometimes nicer, well, many believe that it's nice to just separate yourself from your ego and your consciousness and, you know, just get a new perspective on life and, you know, who you are and shit like that. It's theorized that this part of psychedelics is what can be really helpful for your mental health and, you know, just help out with shit like anxiety and depression and, you know, all the bad shit like that. But while it can be helpful, it can also be very scary to be separated from your ego because, you know, that's your sense of self and it's just you're used to it your whole entire life. So it's definitely not beneficial for everyone, but if it's done right in a good setting and you're in a good place, you can really get some new outlooks on life and just who you are as a person. Male/female therapy dyad. Now, from my understanding, this honest to God has absolutely nothing to do with psychedelics. Looking this shit up, it's just discussing the differences in male and female therapists and how it could be more beneficial to see a therapist of your own gender. Like, I guess this could relate to psychedelics if you're talking about psychedelic therapy, but I really don't know why this is on this list, so I'm not really going to talk about it much longer. But I do also quickly want to say that I do just disagree with this. I mean, I know it says sometimes it's beneficial, not for everyone, but me personally, I'd rather speak to a girl therapist. I don't know, they're just easier to talk to. And I know I'm not alone on this because, I mean, just look at Tony Soprano. That's the best therapist-client duo of all time. I mean, some of the scenes kind of suck, but it goes hard. Nixon lied about drugs. There's a lot to talk about on this tier. I personally think the war on drugs is probably one of the stupidest things of all time. And, you know, I don't endorse drug use, but the war on drugs really helps, like, basically no one, and it hurts hundreds of thousands of people every year. So let me take you guys back to the 1970s when Nixon was put into office and we had a whole bunch of hippies running around doing a bunch of drugs and just protesting basically everything that the government was doing. This was a very chaotic time in America, as this is when we were fighting in Vietnam, and there was just a lot of protesters who thought that it was just very stupid and we needed to stop this violence. And among those protesters, there was a lot of hippies and just a lot of people that were using drugs. During this time, Nixon would really start cracking down on drug use and was actually the one who formed the DEA.
America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse. In order to fight and defeat this enemy, it is necessary to wage a new all-out offensive. I have asked the Congress to provide the legislative authority and the funds to fuel this kind of an offensive.
He claimed that his reasoning for enforcing more drug laws was to protect us Americans from these harmful substances. But the truth was, it was not a war on drugs, it was more a war on hippies and black people. John Erkelman, who was the assistant to the president for domestic affairs under Richard Nixon, John would later speak out about Richard Nixon and talk about what his real motives were for the war on drugs, and he famously said, "You want to know what this war on drugs was really about? The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news." And shit, this is exactly what they did. I mean, surprisingly, Nixon was not really the strictest or the worst with the drug laws, as when he was in office, if you look at the arrests, they really didn't go up that much for drug offenses. But he certainly pumped out a lot of propaganda to vilify these communities. And not only that, he really started the notion that we need to crack down on drug use and treat these people like criminals. But it really wasn't until Reagan got into office that shit really hit the fan.
Drugs are menacing our society. They're threatening our values and undercutting our institutions. They're killing our children. From the beginning of our administration, we've taken strong steps to do something about this horror. Tonight, I can report to you that we've made much progress. 37 federal agencies are working together in a vigorous national effort. And by next year, our spending for drug law enforcement will have more than tripled from its 1981 levels.
By the 1980s, when Reagan was in office, the amount of people locked up for drugs went up by 126%. And you know, a lot of people might argue that it's good that a lot more people are locked up for using and selling drugs, you know, considering drugs are indeed bad for people. But the thing is, the war on drugs does little to nothing to stop the use and spread of drugs. The amount of drug overdoses have gone up every single year since 1980, so clearly it's not something that we can stop. And I'd argue that criminalizing these drugs just make drug overdoses go up even more, because no matter what, there's going to be a market for drugs, and if you criminalize it, then it's just going to be an illegal black market that's not regulated, and they could be putting anything in the drugs. And it also just creates for a lot more crime between these rival drug organizations. And not only were there far more arrests due to drugs, there were also laws that were passed that were very clearly racially motivated. Most notably of these laws was the laws that they had set for crack and cocaine. Crack having 5 grams of would get you locked up for 5 years in prison, while it would take 500 grams of cocaine to get the same sentence. And for those of you guys who don't know, crack and cocaine are basically the same drug, and I'm just gonna let my man Dr. Carl Hart explain this, because dude's like a psychologist and researches drugs and just a lot smarter than me, and I like how he breaks it down. So here's a clip from him talking about this. Sadly, YouTube will not let me play this clip, but basically in this clip, Dr. Carl Hart just talks about how crack and coke are basically like the same drug, and the only real difference is the laws and the stigmas around each drug. So yeah, crack and cocaine are basically the exact same. I mean, crack is literally just crystallized cocaine. The real main big difference between crack and cocaine is that crack is mostly used by low-income black neighborhoods, while cocaine is used by rich white people. So yeah, this law was very clearly passed to, you know, just lock up more black people or lock up more poor people, because if they really cared about people's health and that's why they were locking people up for using these substances, they would have the same laws for cocaine. It's literally the same drug. And even today, crack is seen as a much more harmful substance than cocaine because of just all the propaganda that's been put out. Now, I'm certainly not recommending that you do crack. I don't think anyone should do crack or cocaine, but I think it's important for people to understand that these are both just as harmful to your body. I mean, crack is definitely a little bit more dangerous just for the simple fact that you smoke it, and also people could be putting any kind of shit in there. But at the end of the day, they basically are the same drug. But yeah, at the end of the day, don't trust the fucking government. The war on drugs isn't a war on drugs, it's a war on people and ideas, man. Serotonin syndrome. Serotonin syndrome is a potentially life-threatening drug-induced condition that's caused by having too much serotonin in your brain. And while psychedelics produce more serotonin in your brain, and that's what makes you trip, but just taking psychedelics on their own will not cause for you to have serotonin syndrome. While psychedelics do mainly affect serotonin, it's impossible for it to give you serotonin syndrome. Why this is, I'm not really completely sure because I'm just not really that smart with all this science shit, but psychedelics' effect on your serotonin is all completely healthy. And I mean, I know this because no one's ever died from just straight up taking psychedelics. But the thing is, when you mix psychedelics with antidepressants or SSRIs, there is a serious possibility of being affected by serotonin syndrome. So if you're a person that's prescribed antidepressants, you must get off that shit for a couple of days if you're planning on trying psychedelics. The effects of serotonin syndrome can range from mild shivering and diarrhea to severe muscle rigidity, fevers, and seizures, and in the worst case, it can actually kill you. So it's very important to never mix SSRIs and psychedelics, because I mean, you might just fucking die. It's not good. Integration. Psychedelics oftentimes will teach you deep things about yourself or just make you look at your life in a different way. It helps create for a better understanding about how our behaviors have a serious effect of our outlook on life. On psychedelics, you'll sometimes learn lessons that help you learn how to, experience a more fulfilling and enjoying life, but the thing is, learning these lessons isn't the hard part. The hard part is integrating this into your real life. Like, I've learned through my experience of not only just tripping, but also just experiencing life that I need to stop chasing instant pleasures. Like, I'll often distract myself with drugs, sex, or just sitting around and watching YouTube videos, hoping that I can find a video that will momentarily distract me from the sadness and despair of my actual life. And while these instant pleasures will work and, distract you from being sad and make you feel happy, once the instant pleasure goes away, you'll only crash down even lower and feel worse. The only way to truly be happy, in my opinion, is to create long-term goals that are, not easy to accomplish, that you have to work on each day. It might not be fun while you're working on it, but once you complete it, you're gonna be like, fuck yeah, I actually did that shit. Shit like working out or doing your schoolwork or actually just chasing your passions, it might be really hard to do and there might be times where you don't want to do it, but going through the shit that's difficult, it just makes it feel all the better. The best analogy I've ever heard from this is from the GOAT, Psych Substance. Life is like when you have to take a big shit. Now hear me out. When you got a shit and you just take a shit right away, it's not really that pleasurable. You're just taking a shit. But if you have to shit and you're in a car ride and you gotta hold it in, it really sucks. You're letting out little farts that just smell like absolute ass. You feel completely uncomfortable, and all you want to do is take a shit. It's painful. It's not fun. It sucks. But once you finally get to a bathroom after a couple hours, after holding in this massive shit for a long time, and you finally sit down on that toilet and just blow all that shit out your ass, it is the most pleasurable, almost orgasmic experience that you can really feel. The point is, going through pain creates pleasure. We can't always be happy, and going through the rough times is really what helps you grow as a person. But yeah, I'm getting on a side tangent. The point of the matter is, I know all of this, and I know I need to do this to be happy, but integrating it is a whole nother story. I still often find myself chasing instant pleasures and distracting myself from the pain that I feel, and I know it's bad, and I'm working on it every day, and I recommend you guys try to do the same. So what I'm saying, dogs, is integrate what you've learned into your real life. Just knowing the answers is not enough. You gotta actually do the shit. Bike day. This is referring to when Albert Hofmann discovered LSD. As I discussed previously in this video, Albert Hofmann was working at a lab trying to figure out a way to constrict blood vessels for whatever reason. One of the drugs he would create would end up being LSD, and it would take him a long time to figure out what this drug could actually do. He would originally test it out on lab rats, and he would find that it did not serve any purpose for what he was looking for. He noticed it caused restlessness in the rats and really didn't have anything to do with constricting blood vessels or whatever he was really trying to do. So he put the drug off to the side as he didn't really see what purposes it could serve. But 5 years later, he started testing with it again just out of curiosity, and he ended up spilling a little bit on himself. After getting dosed with, at the time, this completely unknown chemical, he noticed he had a remarkable restlessness combined with a slight dizziness, and being scared of, whatever he had just taken, he decided to head home. After returning home, in his own words, he would say that he would experience fantastic pictures, extraordinary shapes with intense kaleidoscopic plays of color. This experience would very much interest Albert Hofmann, and 3 days after this, on 4/19/1943, he consumed 250 micrograms of LSD, and he thought a dose this low would actually have no effects on him, but little did he know that it takes very little LSD to pack a punch. 40 minutes after consuming this LSD, he would write a note saying that he's beginning to feel dizziness, feelings of anxiety, visual distortions, symptoms of paralysis, and desire to laugh. And this would also be the last thing he would record about the drug that day, because boy was about to get sent to the 5th dimension. So Albert Hofmann's probably tweaking at this point, and he would end up asking his lab assistant to take him home. And while due to World War II going on at this time, there was a restriction of cars and other shit like that, so his lab assistant had no means to actually take him home, and The only way Albert Hofmann could get home was by bicycle. Well, Albert Hofmann would bike home while tripping balls, and this is how we get the name Bike Day. And so 419 is kind of like a holiday for those who like to trip, just like how 420 is a holiday for those who like to smoke. And I mean, it's just a coincidence that they're one day apart. Pretty cool coincidence if you ask me. And also after this event, Albert Hofmann, just like anyone else who takes LSD, was quite interested in this drug, and he would continue to experiment with LSD and also introduce this chemical to his colleagues. And well, as time would go on, word about this drug would spread. In the 1950s, researchers were trying to see if LSD could treat schizophrenia, depression, and alcoholism. And well, it was only a matter of time before LSD curiosity would spread outside of laboratories and scientists. By the 1960s, LSD was spread all across America, the hippie revolution was beginning, and just all that jazz. So yeah, 419 is the anniversary for the first time anyone ever tripped sack on LSD. Empathogens. This is a class of psychoactive drugs that produces experiences of emotional communion, oneness, relatedness, and being more emotionally open. By far the most common of these empathogen drugs is MDMA or Molly. But there's many more drugs that fall under this category, and I'll just pull them up so you guys can take a look. And I mean, honestly, I don't have anything too interesting to say because first off, I've never really experimented with any of these kind of drugs, and second off, it's just a class of drugs. Like, what else am I supposed to say about it, dog? Afterglow. This is referring to the way you feel after a psychedelic trip. Unlike most drugs where you feel like hungover or kind of shitty the next day, psychedelics oftentimes will make you feel refreshed and almost reborn. It just feels nice returning back to normal reality after tripping sack for like hours on end. Like really the best way to describe it is you do just kind of feel reborn, like everything's fresh again and you kind of have a new outlook on just being yourself and the world, and it just feels nice to like feel what it's like to be a normal human that's not tripping sack. Like you feel more grateful for the fact that we're experiencing life. Like you just kind of realize that life itself is kind of like one big trip, and it's cool to be here. While this will happen most of the times when you trip, it usually only happens when the trip is like good. I mean, you can have some bad trips when you get out of it, you still feel refreshed and you're grateful that it's over. But sometimes you'll have a bad trip that will just completely fuck up your head for the next couple of days and you will not feel the afterglow. Like I've had some crazy, ridiculous, cuckoo banana trips that just like made absolutely no sense. It just made me feel like I was going insane. And the day after that, I certainly did not feel refreshed. I felt confused as fuck and kind of like I just fried my brain. Like I remember one time after a really bad trip, I kept seeing like lasting closed-eye visuals of just like this little scribble ball like animated, and like it made me think that my brain was literally completely fried and I was fucked up forever, and like it just wasn't good. So I don't want to say that an afterglow is guaranteed if you trip, but it does happen if you have a good trip. Toad venom. Some species of toads, most notably the Cenarian desert toad, creates DMT as a defense mechanism, and people can extract this in a process referred to as milking. How all this works is kind of confusing, but I'm gonna let the GOAT Hamilton Morris explain all this science shit because, as I've said many times, I just don't get all this fucking science shit. I'm just here to trip sack and talk more about the spiritual Avatar the Last Airbender type kind of shit. Like, I don't really get all this fucking science shit with the enzymes and the fucking you-know-what, but Hamilton Morris certainly does, so let me just play you this clip. I also cannot play this clip because, YouTube's being lame, but in this clip, basically, it's Hamilton Morris just saying a bunch of really smart science shit that doesn't even make sense, so, I mean, it doesn't really matter. All that really matters is that these toads produce DMT, and more specifically, 5-MeO-DMT, and this is an even more potent than regular DMT. It's often referred to as the God molecule because basically when you smoke this shit and break through, you're like guaranteed to either meet God or experience what it is like to be God. And I know that sounds a bit crazy that a drug would let you meet God, and I could understand why most people wouldn't get behind this idea, and honestly, I'm not sure if you really do meet God, but what I believe is there's just a little bit of God in each and every one of us, and what these molecules do is they separate us from our mind and our ego, and it basically connects yourself as what we would perceive as God. You kind of feel like you're everything and everyone, and I don't know, it's all kind of just crazy nonsense that you wouldn't really understand unless you smoke the substance, but basically, if you smoke 5-MeO-DMT, you're gonna experience what it's like to either be God or to meet God. And whether or not it's real what you experience, it's certainly gonna feel more realistic than even your everyday life, so it's gonna be a little kooky. And all this is produced by fucking toads on their back, which is kind of fucking crazy. I mean, now we figured out how to create all this just like in a lab without having to actually use any toads because we're smart with science and shit like that. And also some people claim that it's like toad abuse to be scraping this shit off their back because it probably definitely does hurt them, but what are you gonna do? These motherfuckers are hopping around with potent ass DMT on their back. Like, come on, these motherfuckers are obviously about to get scraped and smoked. Orange sunshine. Orange sunshine was a kind of LSD that was produced in the 60s and 70s, and it was known to be some of the most potent, purest acid ever created. The people behind these orange sunshine tabs were a part of a gang called the Brotherhood of Eternal Love, or as some knew as the Hippie Mafia. Popular prolific members of this group were people like Nicholas Sand, John Griggs, Ronald Stark, and Timothy Leary. And basically, this group of hippies had a mission to spread LSD all across America, as they thought this would change the world for better. They weren't really into making LSD to make a profit, but they really just wanted to spread the joy of, tripping sack. They were considered the Johnny Appleseeds of psychedelics, often giving out psychedelics for free or very cheap. A famous story is once in the 1970s, they flew a cargo plane over 25,000 people at a rock concert, and they dropped thousands of packets of their iconic orange sunshine acid, which again is known to be the most powerful potent acid of all time. And they basically just blessed thousands of these concert goers with some free acid, which is a pretty charitable thing to do if you ask me. The head chemist of the operation, Nicholas Sand, says he estimated that he produced over 140 million tabs of LSD in his lifetime. Sadly, he would end up getting sent to prison for 15 years, amongst other members that also got sent to prison. There's a lot more to this story, and it's actually really interesting, and there's some good documentaries on it, but the thing is, I'm getting to that point where I'm kind of just being lazy again, and I can't really just do the best research at the moment, so I'm sorry, dogs, but this video is already like hella long, and I'm just trying to rush it out. I can't fake. And I mean, I don't know, if you want to learn more, just watch the documentary, dog. I don't know, I'm sorry. Please don't get mad for how shit my content is. I swear it's gonna get better. I'm sorry, man. Please, I'm sorry. Stoned ape theory. Stoned ape theory is a theory from Terence McKenna that says that the reason that monkeys evolved into humans was basically because they were eating magic mushrooms. The theory itself is kind of wacky and wild, and I don't personally subscribe to the beliefs, but I'm just gonna let Joe Rogan explain it to y'all because, well, as I said, I'm trying to rush this video out, dog. I'm trying to fucking upload this shit, not do any more research, you know what I'm saying?
His theory was that one of the things that was in play was that these apes would experiment with different food sources as they moved into the grasslands. And there was a lot of ungulates in these grasslands, and that psilocybin mushrooms, which we know existed back then, would grow in these grasslands. And that these monkeys, these apes rather, started consuming psilocybin mushrooms, and it led them to be more creative, and it also led to specific traits like the development of language. That eating mushrooms in low doses increases visual acuity, which would lead them to be better hunters or more perceptive. It also leads them to be hornier, which would most likely involve more breeding, more sexual activity, and possibly select the ones that chose the mushrooms would maybe possibly breed more than the ones that didn't choose the mushrooms because they were more into it, they were more social, more sexually active.
So yeah, pretty interesting theory. I don't really believe it because I feel like if monkeys ate mushrooms, it wouldn't make them more productive and better at hunting. It would probably just like make them tweak out. And on top of that, there's a big argument that, monkeys eating mushrooms wouldn't affect them on the genetic level, so like it wouldn't really change anything about evolution. Like if the monkeys eating mushrooms reproduce more, it really still doesn't explain anything about the doubling of the brain size or how they could learn how to communicate. Like, it's a pretty wild theory, but I mean, it's a fun theory, and it's pretty interesting, and there's a lot of cool videos on it, and I mean, if you expect me to talk more about it, you're on the wrong YouTube channel, buddy. Let's get on to the next part of this iceberg. Shamanism. Shamanism is a religious practice where a shaman helps guide someone through the spiritual world, and these practices also use psychedelics. Most commonly used is ayahuasca, and basically the shaman will almost kind of trip sit them, but unlike a trip sitter where they are just to make sure someone's okay, a shaman believes that they can communicate with the spiritual world. They believe all the spirits that you encounter are completely real and like they're all a part of the spiritual world, and that there's either good or bad ones, and they believe that these spiritual entities can actually heal you from your sicknesses, but also the bad ones, they are the ones that cause sicknesses and death. They basically believe that this spiritual world basically plays a role in like our everyday life, and spiritual shamans are basically masters of the physical and spiritual world, and they'll help take people through this spiritual world and basically keep them away from the evil bad spirits, and basically just take them on whatever journey that they need or whatever they're like looking for. These practices originated from indigenous people from far northern Europe and Siberia. Many people will actually travel to these places to experience what it's like to do ayahuasca guided by a shaman. And well, now the practices have actually spread all over the world. I actually found this whole ass website that helps you find shamans near you. Now, I'm sure these shamans in the United States are probably not quite as good or, really just like as cultured as, a real shaman from these actual indigenous tribes because, they live their entire life doing this shit. These other people are kind of just stealing their swag, but, it's still kind of interesting that, people in the United States are trying to, partake in their culture. And I mean, it's probably a good thing in the end that, they're spreading the culture and the word of shamans all across America. But also at the same time, these American shamans, I feel like, are probably misrepresenting their culture just quite a bit. So like, if you really want a shamanic experience, you gotta travel over to these fucking far ass places and, you know, meet these true spiritual gurus. None of this phony American shit. Lemon tech. Lemon tech is a nice little life hack to make your shrooms more potent. All you have to do is soak your shrooms in some lemon tech for about 20 minutes. I'd also recommend breaking up the mushrooms first and giving them like a little mix every 5 minutes while they're soaking. Then after 20 minutes of this, you just slurp the whole thing down. And the actual effects of lemon tech are kind of widely debated, as no one really knows how much more potent it makes the shrooms. Some say it makes the shrooms up to 4 times as potent, which I can say from my own experience, I would not say it makes it 4 times as potent, but I'd certainly agree it makes the effects stronger. And also what it really does is it makes the trip shorter, but it makes it more intense. Like it kind of makes everything just hit you faster and more sudden. The reason this works is when magic mushrooms are soaked in lemon tech, the acid breaks down the cell walls of the shrooms, and this makes it easier for your body to absorb the psilocybin. And I know, more confusing science shit, but basically what it is instead of the psilocybin, you know, like slowly hitting you more and more and making you trip more and more, when you combine it with lemon tech, all the psilocybin will basically hit you at once, and it'll just be a lot more intense, but the trip will definitely be shorter. But yeah, again, I definitely don't endorse any psychedelic use, but I do gotta say that this is like an all-time great life hack when you got some mushrooms and you want to make them more potent. I'd also use this method when I was trying to get past my psychedelic tolerance. I'd be tripping every single week with the fucking lemon tech method. Like, this method really is no joke in my experience. Philosopher stones. Philosopher stones is an ancient mythic of a substance that could turn base metals like mercury to more valuable metals like gold. In current day though, philosopher stones has gained a new meaning, and it's basically a slang for magic truffles. And magic truffles are essentially the same things as magic mushrooms, as they have the same active chemical that makes you trip. The difference is, magic truffles are essentially the subterranean part of the mushroom ready to be utilized as food for reserves by the rest of the organism. And you know, I'm no mushroom expert, but the important thing to note is both magic mushrooms and magic truffles contain psilocybin, which is the active chemical that makes you trip. And while the reason people make a distinction between magic truffles and magic mushrooms is, in places like the Netherlands, magic mushrooms are completely illegal while magic truffles are completely legal and sold at smoke shops and just basically anywhere. This is basically a loophole they got going in the Netherlands, where in 2008 they passed a law banning specifically psilocybin containing mushrooms, but they did not ban psilocybin, so magic truffles are still completely legal and they basically are the exact same thing as magic mushrooms. Ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is basically DMT, but instead of smoking it, you take it orally.
Ayahuasca is actually a combination of the leaves of one plant and the vines of another, neither of which have any hallucinogenic power on their own. But the leaves do contain DMT, which is structurally similar to your neurotransmitter serotonin and to the chemical found in magic mushrooms. The problem is, your gut enzymes normally deactivate DMT before it's absorbed into your bloodstream, and this is where the vines come in. They inhibit your gut enzymes from working properly and allow DMT to travel within your blood and eventually cross the blood-brain barrier.
But the differences between ayahuasca and DMT are still pretty major, because when you're taking ayahuasca and the DMT is slowly absorbed through your gut, it creates for a more longer, much drawn-out experience that lasts up to 4 hours, while DMT lasts around like 20 minutes. When you smoke just pure DMT, all the DMT just hits you right away and you instantly just leave this galaxy, but when you take ayahuasca, the DMT kind of slowly hits you more and more, and it basically just creates for a longer DMT trip. Ayahuasca is certainly not something people would take for like fun, you know, it's more of an experience, or people do it to try to fix stuff in their lives, and also it's something that you basically need to take with either a shaman or at the very least a trip sitter, because tripping on basically DMT for 4 hours could cause some serious risk of self-harm. And also, opposed to DMT where you like just can't move at all, ayahuasca, like during the peak, yeah, you're probably going to be like passed out, but it doesn't really completely paralyze you like DMT does, so you know, there's a lot of room where you could actually like hurt yourself, and it can be very dangerous. The thing I found most interesting about ayahuasca is the fact that, you know, the shamans, where most people take it, actually believe that this is like all completely real, that you're entering the spiritual world. There are like specific ayahuasca entities that, you know, multiple different people, the same tribe, will report seeing, and they'll have like their own profile where like these entities have their own meaning and they all have their own purpose, and I don't know, it's just kind of interesting. Most commonly of these entities is a lot of people report seeing something known as Mother Ayahuasca. And from the trip reports, Mother Ayahuasca seems like a very cool chick. Basically, you know, she's like a mother. She's very caring about, you know, your well-being, your health, and just making sure that you're thriving. And well, if all this sounds very cuckoo bananas to you guys, let me just read you a couple trip reports from different people all experiencing the same Mother Ayahuasca. The ayahuasca spirit came to me in that space. She held me lovingly with my head against her chest as my soul wept like it had never before. I asked her what she can teach me. She said, stop using drugs. There was a kind of fury in her message, but immense love as well. I was frustrated, I knew I needed to stop. I asked her again and again what she had to teach me. She only ever said to stop doing drugs, but more sternly each time. I finally stopped asking. Her anger instilled in me a hint of fear. Once I was silent, she held me for a few moments without saying anything. I felt such peace as I had never before or since. She engulfed me in one last ephemeral embrace of pure light and love before disappearing, leaving me alone and sober in the darkness of my room. Another trip report reads, "Then I felt a presence as if I was surrounded by dozens of people. They were there to comfort me, to calm me down, and I began to feel wonderful. I heard or possibly felt a woman assure me that everything was going to be okay, and she beckoned me to come with her to the spirit world. She felt motherly, which evoked images of Mother Earth, Mother Nature, or Pachamama. I'm not sure if I said that last word correctly, I'll be honest. And those are just a few examples out of the hundreds of experiences of people on ayahuasca that said that they met with this motherly figure known as Mother Ayahuasca. Now, it might seem a little crazy to believe in a whole spirit world where, you know, there's like real entities that people can meet. And while I'm not really sure if I believe in all that hoopla, but I do believe that, you know, we're all kind of connected on some level, and maybe taking these psychedelics, you know, it kind of separates you from your body and your ego, which is really what separates us as people, and maybe it just connects you to the part of us that, you know, all of us are connected to, like your soul or whatever. And, you know, I personally believe that these entities are already a part of us, and maybe they're just a part of everyone, and that's why everyone sees the same entities, because, you know, we're all humans, and I mean, we're all going through different experiences, but on some level, the spiritual level, I think we are all the same, so, you know, we would encounter the same spiritual experiences. Alright, but I've rambled enough about my crazy cuckoo banana thoughts, so let's just check out the next thing on this iceberg. Candy flipping. This is when you combine LSD with MDMA, and a lot of people say this is one of the most pleasurable drug experiences that, you know, you can encounter. And this is not something I've ever done or really plan on doing, but I'd imagine it would be a pretty fun experience because MDMA just makes you really happy, and LSD like basically just sends you to Neo Tokyo. So I'd imagine that there's some good chemistry between the two drugs, but I mean, there's just not really that much for me to talk about on this tier because, I mean, it's just combining two drugs together. There's nothing really that interesting to talk about in my opinion. Plus, I've never done it, so I can't really talk on any personal experiences. So basically, let's move on to the next thing. Summer of Love. Summer of Love was a huge hippie movement in San Francisco in 1967, where over 100,000 people all came together from places all across the world to basically just do a bunch of hippie shit. And by hippie shit, I basically mean experimenting with sex and drugs and living in communes and not really working a job, and I mean kind of just being a bum, I can't lie. Credited for starting this movement is the Human Be In rally on January 14th, 1967. This was basically a huge hippie gathering and a counterculture movement where people all came together and preached ideas of communal living, political decentralization, environmental awareness, and dropping out. And by dropping out, they mean dropping out of like the American conservative way of going to school and getting a job and, you know, all that jazz. And also, obviously, LSD was a big part of this movement. And while this movement might sound like paradise to a lot of people, like a great thing, it really was not. The movement didn't even last a year, and the reality is dropping out and living in communes where everyone is doing drugs is not really the best life path. There were many incidents of rape in this movement, along with mental health issues and drug addiction. And I mean, basically just think about any commune or like cult ever, they never really work out. I mean, maybe for like a couple years it might be good and, you know, everyone's living a great life, but always the leader of the commune or cult ends up getting obsessed with power, ends up fucking everyone's wives, and just ends up being an absolute weirdo. If it's bitter, it's a spitter. Now this is some classic age-old advice for when you're taking LSD. If it's bitter, it's a spitter. The reason for that is real LSD, when you take it, will have absolutely no taste, while when you take other research chemicals like N-bomb, you know, stuff like that, it's gonna taste very bitter and almost have like a chemical taste to it. Like, trust me, you will notice if what you have is not real LSD simply from the taste of it. But with that being said, you should still definitely always just test your substances so you know what you're taking without having to do, you know, like a fucking taste test. But yeah, there you guys go. That's the whole second layer of the psychedelic iceberg. For my next video, I might try to do something else besides this iceberg, unless if you guys really want to see me continue to break this down, then, you know, I'll of course do it for the doggies. So just let me know in the comments what you guys want to see, and also, you know, drop a like, subscribe, all that good shit. And also, most importantly, if you guys enjoy my content, please consider joining the Discord. Like, honestly, I chat in my Discord more than I chat with like my real life friends. So basically, if you join my Discord, you're gonna become my best friend. So, you know, like, if you want to be best friends with me, please join. And on top of that, there's already a bunch of cool doggies already in the Discord, and you can just never have too many cool doggies. So I mean, so if that interests y'all at all, you know, please join. You know, it's a fun time, no reason not to. But, you know, with that being said, as always, peace out, doggies.